Good morning, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us today for another one of our professional development series webinars. Today's session is on economic development ethics. Again, my name is Dale Wielden, President CEO for the BC Economic Development Association. Happy to be with you all. We have today speaker Allison Larson from Tedzo Consulting out of Phoenix, I'm guessing Arizona. I think you're in Phoenix. Allison has done does our economic development ethics training at our course annually, and has been a real big supporter of BCEDA over the years, and we greatly appreciate it. She is also a friend. I consider her a friend, and she is somebody that I know that I have learned a lot from, and I know a lot of our economic developers have learned a lot from. She is on the board of directors for the International Economic Development Council, and does do work with them around disaster recovery and other types of work as well. So without going on any further, I'm going to hand it over to Allison. If at any time you have questions during the presentation, feel free to type them in the chat. We'll be monitoring that, and we will interrupt Allison. At the end, we will ask if there's time permitting, we will ask if there's any other questions. So again, over to you, Allison. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Dale. It's my pleasure to be here. And certainly this is an important topic for economic developers and really community-wide, considering the type of money and investments that we work with. So we're going to spend a little bit of time going over ethics. It may seem like a really dry topic, but that being said, when you're in the situation, we've got some go-to information for you. I know the International Economic Development Council, as a board member, as well as BCEDA, take this very seriously and have had to deal with ethics challenges. And so by presenting this information, we're raising everyone's awareness about this and making you a lot more capable in those tough situations. So let's get started. Okay, you're in the right place for the Economic Development Ethics webinar here. Let me start by inviting you to go to chat and type in your thoughts about why ethics are important in economic development. There's a hint, there's more than one reason, right? There's lots of reasons. Don't be shy. We have fairness, sustainability. That could be sustainability of your budget. Your whole economic development program could go away if you misuse the trust of your community, of those you work with. Integrity, reputation of your organization, of course. It can even be the reputation of how you market. Is it trusted information if you're not operating ethically? So there's a wide variety of reasons for ethics and economic development. I love this one that came in from Kayla. Every decision has a direct impact on people's lives. So yes, we carry that responsibility of the community we serve, the people that are elected to serve as well. So we're working as a large team here. It can help your credibility, right, with the partners we work with, that they know they can trust and work with you, and that you all deliver on your promises fairly. So let's jump into it. Oh, here's a good one. Not just the slide, but Renata, excellent. Perceived conflict of interest, and we're going to talk a lot about that today. You know, I hope you're never put in this position. Yes, a little tongue-in-cheek with this ethical business cartoon, but certainly we wouldn't do that. But I would name it. I've seen economic developers in unnamed places to think they can do this with marketing or the thing that they're trying to promote in their asset. So we can laugh at the pretty cartoon here, but don't be surprised if you did come across. So today, what we are going to cover are the codes of conduct that really do help that long-term viability. We heard right off the front from David putting in the comments that a reason for ethics is sustainability. This profession is in the public eye, and so the viability of our profession and professionals is crucially needs to be handled with ethics. We also will give guidance today on the importance of the integrity in all of our decision making. There's immense things that we work with in this profession. We'll give you some tools though on literally walking through checklists of making ethical decisions. And the beautiful thing that you have in front of you is the BC Code of Ethics. We're going to do a deep dive into that. The good news, and I'll say this many times, this is considered a acceptable swipe file because we believe that this can be a model. The board of directors of BCEDA has worked with IEDC and other organizations and have adopted their clear set of code of ethics, and it is a model for you to replicate at the local level. So let's talk a little bit about that history. Certainly, I kind of foreshadowed that a bit, but the board of directors in 2012 did go ahead and create this. So it has some legs here over 10 years. And then there were modifications because over time, more things emerged that they wanted to address. It is modeled after the International Economic Development Council's Code of Ethics, which was originated in dialogue in 2008 and then was adopted. It's cool to know that BCEDA is a leader in Canada as the first code of ethics in the Canadian Economic Development Association, and continues to have training. This is a webinar, so you can share it and show it to many other people that may not be able to participate in the in-person training that's been going on for at least 10 years. And again, since it was adopted, or modifications were adopted in 2015, there's additional enforcement policy and information, and we're going to cover all that today. So let's jump into understanding ethics and generally. It's really knowing the difference between having what you have a right to do, i.e. something that's legal, and what is right to do. This is not just a play on words. It's really a true statement in that it goes beyond the ramifications of rules and what is right. It will be things that you might take for granted. You think, I'm an ethical person, or the people around me are ethical. And in reality, it can be simple decisions that are in our day-to-day life, but they can, simple, ordinary. It can also be extraordinary decisions. So don't take for granted ethical behavior. We really want to scrutinize that as we raise our awareness of how we're acting more and behaving more ethically in our profession, in our day-to-day life. And I said this with our little play on words. It's a higher standard than simply the rules. If you have rules in your organization, of course, we have laws in our to respectfully abide by. But this is more than that. And that's where it gets squishy. And that's where we really want to be explicit and take a deeper dive into that. So the International City Managers Association has like 10 questions that can really unpack a situation to help make an ethical decision. First of all, is it legal? So not only do we want it legal, and not only do we want it right and ethical, it's an easy place to start. Like, is this a legal decision forward, I don't want to say illegal. it is a legal action to be taken. A little tongue-tied there. Does it violate the spirit of the law? So maybe it's explicitly not stated to be legal, but it would be in violation of the spirit of the law. Does it comply with our rules and regulations? So in that case, an organization or a company, or even, your city or township rules and regulations. In this case, the organization of the BCEDA Professional Organization. Is it consistent with your organizational values? So just because we come to work with our individual values, has your organization gone through an exercise to really deep dive into what your organization values? Because that would go beyond legality, the spirit of the laws, and even rules and regulations. Does it match our stated commitments? So if elected officials or leaders of your organization and others are out there making commitments to your community, does this action, the decision you make as a result of the action, match your stated commitments or go contrary to that? Of course, we want to look at the motivation. Someone brought up earlier the conflict of interest. So am I the only or primary beneficiary? When we're trying to serve the greater good of our community, this is a beautiful ethical decision for economic development. Will I feel okay and guilt-free if I do this? What the action is in front of you, you're trying to decide. Is it bias or emotion clouding my judgment? So as we go deeper from legal, we're now taking into more of the squishy things that may be harder to identify. We really have to pause for a moment and go through these questions. Is it bias or emotion clouding my judgments? Would I do it to my family and friends, or even to myself? And then, of course, sometimes when we measure up our decision making, it's nice to put it against a high bar of the most ethical person I know. Would they do this? So these 10 questions could be a safe way of having a dialogue around a tough decision-making process. It's a third party that can bring it to. You can take this and have this available as kind of a checklist to making the most ethical decisions you can in those situations. Now, of course, I brought up values in those questions. So to focus on strong values of your organization, the organization does need to go through a process to clearly establish organizational values. I would say that if your organization values all of the members and workers, if you will, it's good to have a dialogue about what our values are instead of just 100% giving them top down, but integrating some input on that. And then have those values integrated throughout all your operations and support systems so that it's in alignment. None of the work and processes that you have are contrary to upholding those values. We also want to promote those through communications, that it's very clear both to your members, to your staff, to anyone that's working with you, the general public. We interface with the general public a lot, as well as many outside stakeholders like businesses, to promote that as how you're operating. And then again, operationally and systemally, we're integrating those, but make sure there's a lens on taking your values as a lens on all your policies and decision-making processes, so that you're never asking anyone to work counter to those values, of which those values are immensely important to the code of conduct that we'll be talking about shortly. So in promoting an ethical culture, we know this, right? Model it from the top. So if you're the CEO or on a board of directors, go ahead and make sure you're being very explicit in your ethical behavior. We've seen those organizations, or maybe read about them, where the top person is the biggest offender. Well, how can we expect those that we're trying to lead? I mean, it's just a prime leadership model, right? Do as I do, not as I say, right? I mean, you want to say and do consistently to present that best ethical behavior and culture. Now, education is immensely useful in ethics, because we can't just assume that we're all talking about the same thing or understand the same thing. Many people come to their work and they come from many different backgrounds and many different upbringings. And so really providing some good education programs for all employees will enhance that broad-based mutual understanding and foster a more ethical culture. Of course, policies should enable employees to make ethical decisions. This goes back to having those values and ethics in alignment so that decisions fall fruitfully in an ethical way from that consistent alignment. And more for promoting an ethical culture, ethical programs should really they should explain the principles that underlie why they're put forward, explicitly clarify ethical behavior, and explain the difference between ethical behavior and legal or illegal actions. Remember, we said ethical behavior is more than legality. And then also, these programs should lay out procedural guidelines. You're going to see an example of this with BCEDA's Code of Ethics. And so, again, I'm not being cheeky and saying you get to steal this one. What we're trying to do is promote an ethical culture by sharing BCEDA's Code of Ethics as a model. You're not starting from scratch. It may be a way for you to really take a look at how this could apply for you. And to be honest with this one, IEDC did that for BCEDA. So we're working hand in hand to uplift the economic development profession. So why do you think people act unethically? Do you want to throw some things in the chat there for me? We're all well-intentioned people, but why do people act unethically? Shortcuts, yep. We have lots of time demands. We're working really hard, cutting lots of corners. I mean, economic developers are the hardest working people I know. That's all we got? Okay, well, I got a longer list for you. You're all being shy here. Here's some reasons for unethical behavior. And self-benefit, yeah, thanks, Emily. Pressure to perform, absolutely. That's where, you know, those unrealistic goals may mean we cut corners. We have deadlines. Peers are putting too much pressure. Maybe the management style is in conflict of an ethical behavior for things. Understanding the consequences may be unclear, like a decision's made, but they don't realize that there may be a conflict of interest, or they don't, which, you know, we're not brought up here. So maybe it's just uncharted territory. Our organization has done a lot of work with BRE, but maybe we've never done any work in real estate development. And so there's some uncharted territory of handling the ethical approach to that. There could be personal loyalties that overwhelm, and that could be tied to pressures from peers, right? Or maybe they're looking short-term when the long-term perspective has an ethical question associated with it. The personal costs to do the right thing may be too high. Maybe they're afraid they would lose their job because they're revealing something that is unethical going forward, or just plain poor judgment. And so think over your career, where maybe even as a younger professional, your thoughts and lessons on things were unknown compared to those who may have been involved in any career for a long time. We certainly grow in this. So again, we're going to talk about education because this may be new ground for folks. Some other reasons for unethical behavior is that they just don't understand what the code of conduct is or what's expected. And that comes down to improper, inadequate training. So we can't just assume that people will act ethically. They may not know where the line is on that ethics. So, or they may be under duress or it's just plain uncharted new territory. Of course, because you're so busy, we certainly wouldn't want you to do this, where you just go super fast and ignore the ethical evaluation on this and how it fits with your policies and procedures. So let's work on promoting an ethical behavior. And it really comes down to three components. So this is really take-home action items for you. First, the creation of a written code of conduct that has written policies and procedures for investigation. And so there's kind of two approaches to going about this. One is going through the legal element of it to make sure that you've codified to legal code and are following strict guidelines of behavior. There's also a lens on values and custom-based. And so certainly there are legal elements to the work that we do in economic development, but there are also values that we must adhere to and agree upon as an organization. A common value, as an example, is the confidentiality for businesses that we honor and respect in order to work with them in some very important decision making with businesses, with the value that we will keep that confidential for their business competitiveness. Before I jump ahead, I also want to talk about written policies and procedures for investigation. Again, we're going to give you the example of BCEDA, but this way, once something that is potentially a violation of the code of conduct, you would then go through a very specific set of steps that are consistently evaluating if it has been a violation. And then at the level of violation, you would have a very specific policy and procedure as to the punishment for that, if you will. And that really helps, or sanctions on the violation. That really helps clarity. It takes out all of the personal bias in the evaluation and makes sure that there is a fair vetting of the situation and that may be a potential violation of the code of conduct. Some of this can be squishy, so we really want to unpack that approach appropriately. And if you spend the time with your board of directors to write out the code of conduct, you're being explicit in explaining it. And if you write out the policies and procedures, then you just have those available to activate when there is a concern. I say that because some things can be perceived as a violation of code of conduct, and it truly has to be vetted, as it could immensely affect someone's career. And we want to make sure that we are really vetting that appropriately. And then that also says to your members, your staff, your community, that you are officially looking into the matter. Now, along with the ethics code of conduct, the second component is an education program. We talked about that, right? We talked about the fact that we want to be explicit and have a shared understanding. And so an educational program helps to not just put across what ethics are and the code of conduct for the organization. It also fosters discussions and debates, and often role play. So in this webinar, we're putting some straightforward information together for you. There are some resource materials that we're going to share as well, where you can actually have some case studies and then have dialogue around that, because people may read the case study and have different opinions of that situation. And that can be very educational. In the in-person class, we actually do that. We have a series of case studies where the groups then dialogue around that. And there's quite a discussion about, is it a violation? Is it not? What would be the sanction on that? And so that dialogue, that debate, if you will, is rich in education, because we learn by trying to put a real life scenario, a case study, and look at how would we handle that? What happened wrong? What happened right? How did the manager handle it? How did the individual handle it? And that can be a beautiful, often when we debate those, that's where the greatest learning occurs, because we have put our own implications, our own lens on that, our own background on that case study, which is the point of why we're explicit in a written code of conduct, is that we want to unpack that with the lens of the agreed upon code of conduct, and how we would review that situation. So I can't say enough how productive an educational program. It can be hosted by BCEDA. It can also happen on a regular basis in your organization. Maybe you're doing that in an annual or quarterly way, taking a case study and trying to unpack it, especially if you're going into an uncharted territory, where you're like, there's a case study around this same kind of topic that we're going to be expanding our program into, or whatever. It's upfront, you're educating. And again, I can't say enough about how productive, and they actually can be kind of fun, not as dry as just slides here. And then I also want to point out ethical performance assessment. That is the third component. So if you have a code of conduct, it's all written, and you've done training on it, and then you set up, objectives for individuals that make it hard to perform ethically, then you just kind of like negated all the other work you've done, because you're setting people up to fail. So be a role model in how you operate, but also in how you set up goals and assessment processes. Engage the staff to have a dialogue around what their needs are, as well as what they want to contribute and what you have expectations of staff. If you are a junior person on this webinar and you're like, but my boss sets it, but the council sets it, etc., then raise this question through bringing this idea of how can we have the full three components of ethics and economic development. So don't fall short of this conversation around ethical performance assessment. Make sense? Of course, if you have questions, do put them in the chat, because it makes it a little more interesting for you. So let's move on. Oh, and incentives. I didn't see that last one pop up there. That's the other thing. Do you have incentives that would reward people for bringing to the forefront observations of unethical behavior? Do you have incentives for recognizing someone who made a really tough decision in light of a difficult situation? Are there ways that you're recognizing, raising the opportunity for success, putting a spotlight on these ethical actions, ethical decisions that are made by individuals or as a team, can be really a way to not just celebrate and reinforce positive behavior, but it's also a way to present to your community that you are above board in all the ethical work that you do as an economic development organization. Love that one. Didn't want to leave it off. So I love checklists. Hopefully they can be really helpful for you. When it comes to unpacking like how you train on case studies or how you look at situations, we actually have a 7-step checklist for you. So the first thing to do is to always recognize and clarify the predicament. So if we have perceptions about things, we really want to get to the root of the matter instead of just third hand or an external observation of things. And that would include gathering all essential facts: who's involved, what was said, what was done, etc. And then list all your options of handling the situation. And for each option and handling the decision, handling the situation, it's important to ask yourself, is it legal? Is it right? Is it beneficial? To whom? Kind of going through that whole questionnaire that we had, those 10 questions from the International City Managers Council as well. And then draw your conclusions and make your decision. Now, this may seem with this language that it's like an individual thing. It could be on simple things, but I would highly recommend that you work with your manager, with your team, to really make an overt conclusion and overt decisions together. And you can double check your decisions by asking yourself, how would I feel if my peers and superiors found out about this? How would we feel if our organization was highlighted for this decision, good or bad, by others or by BCEDA? Could you make it public? So that also can put a different kind of lens on the scrutiny of your decision in this ethical dilemma. And then, of course, you would take action accordingly in the positive way because you vetted your options very clearly. Got it? Again, I think these are kind of nice to pull out where you're trying to make a important decision and you wouldn't want to skip any of these. What if you skip number 6 and it was something that really gave you another 360 perspective to everything? So there are 8 pieces of the puzzle, if you will, 8 steps to develop a code of ethics. It's always a good place to start is identifying a champion to lead the development. That could be you. It doesn't have to be the big boss to start off. It could be you saying, hey, we need to develop this. I really want to be engaged in this. I find that this is really important to our organization. If you are in a public sector entity, that very well could be the economic development department saying that to your leadership to be above board. It's always a good idea to engage legal counsel. And then, so it's not all on one person's shoulders and the legal counsel's shoulders alone, but to truly have an ethics task force or committee so that you're looking at it from many different perspectives, bringing in many different situations. Think about the different areas of work in your organization and how you could bring that together. And, I think about BCEDA, it was worked through a task force, but the board of directors, who represents a diverse group of people across the province, had a say in that. And so that can be very helpful as well, because you're looking at it from diverse situations so that you can be most comprehensive in drafting a policy. And then that policy would then go to your elected body or your board of directors, whoever is the highest for your organization. And you would continue to kind of work through that draft policy until you can actually get to approval and adoption. And then, of course, what's the second component is that we not only, so the first was to develop, approve, adopt, and of course, publish that policy. It's a good idea to share it on your website. People then being very transparent that you're working on these ethical on ethics and economic development and operating ethically is a beautiful thing to communicate. But then what's the second component? To train your staff. And I would even go as far to say all of your partners that work on projects together, this is a great way to really bring the conversation in of this is how our organization will lead economic development in our community or our region. And then of course you want to have a regular schedule for reviewing that, both in education or revisions, because new things may come about, especially if you've had violations and you want to hone your code of ethics even further. Make sense? Okay. So let's jump into the BCEDA Code of Ethics. And so this literally is the Code of Ethics. You can get a copy of this if you would like to have this in, other than slide format. It's that professional economic developers shall carry out their responsibilities in a manner to bring respect to the profession, to economic developers themselves and the constituencies. If you see in chat, there is on the BCEDA websites, Ashley has posted that for us. So like I said, it's a great place to store your code of ethics. So that's the first of 11 elements of the code. All economic developers shall practice integrity, honesty, and adherence to the trust placed in them, both in fact and in appearance. So being very explicit, you wouldn't want to just say fact, but we're out there in the public eye and really making sure that appearances are in alignment with this code of ethics and the values. We talked about this earlier. You brought it up from the very beginning about conflict of interest. So this is the fact that economic developers will hold themselves free of interest, influence, or relationship in respect to any professional activity. So this is making sure that we reduce the conflict of interest and we increase conducting our official duties with bipartisanship, that we're really there to serve our clients without any judgment or with things that would interrupt our objectivity on the project. Okay. That was number 3. Yep. Number 4. We do not represent one interest alone. We represent the entire community, the overall community interest. This is an essential part of being a professional economic developer. And this is a place that you may really want to unpack where there are conflicts in representation, and how are you taking that lens to represent the overall community interest? Number 5, professional economic developers shall keep the community, elected official, boards, and other stakeholders informed about the progress and efforts of your area's economic development program in accordance to the protocols established by the governing body. This is that transparency piece, right? So how can we keep them informed that we're working on things and at the same time protect their confidentiality? But we can't do it in the dark is really what we're trying to point out here. So in line with that, we'll maintain in confidence the affairs of any client, colleague, or organization, and not to disclose any confidential information. So 5 and 6 are so interrelated. We want to communicate about what we're doing. This is not done in the dark. We don't just all of a sudden pop up and say, we're going to clear this land and clear all the residents here and put a building up. We're going to communicate. We're going to bring people into the mix. We also are going to protect the confidentiality that is so important to helping our businesses and the clients we serve, as well as our colleagues and our organization. Number 7, we will openly share information with the governing body according to protocols established by the body. And such protocols shall be disclosed to clients and the public. So think about an organization, be it a nonprofit or public private organization. It is immensely important that we share that with the governing body, also with those that need to know in the public sector. Number 8, professional economic developers shall cooperate with peers to the betterment of economic development technique, ability, practice, and strive to perfect themselves in their professional abilities through training and educational opportunities. You think about it, this is a pretty unique profession. We learn a lot by doing. And so BCEDA out front is saying that we're going to work with each other so that we can improve the profession. We're not going to, we can be very competitive, but at the same time, when it comes to training and education, and you see that all across British Columbia, where people are learning and trying new things and then sharing that with ease, which is in line with this number 8. And of course, this is so obvious that we want all our activities to be conducted with equal opportunity. And there you can see to the degree from race, religion, sex, sexual orientation, national origin, political affiliation, disability, age, marital status, or socioeconomic status. We are going to work with everyone in an equitable and fair manner. And so this wraps up with professional economic developers abiding by these principles and complying with this as promulgated by BCEDA. So this is essentially saying all wrapped together, we're going to work on these things together. And finally, and this was part of the amendment in 2015, if I remember correctly, Dale, is that professional economic developers and anyone else participating in BCEDA events, so this is even non-BCEDA members, if they participate in events and programs, shall abide by the bullying, harassment, and sexual harassment policy. And essentially it came about because we want to constantly improve the code of ethics. So I'm just going to be honest here, let's just be real world, I guess. You're never going to get rid of violations. Like, they can never be eliminated. Some of it's just because people will make mistakes because they're uninformed, and some maybe for other reasons. And so in addition to training, which again, I would say these case studies can be very educational, BCEDA has established procedures that help with review and sanctions. So let's walk through those. First, and probably the main component, is really digging into the review of the complaint. Is it really a violation or not? And this, if it is, then that would go through an independent and detailed investigation of the case. And then if a violation is found, there would be imposing sanctions on that individual or group. And I know personally at IEDC, I had submitted some things based on some members had asked me to submit them to our review committee. And although it was not a delightful situation, it did not come in violation of the code of conduct. So again, it is important to do a fair and independent review of that to see if it truly is, or if someone's just not happy with another person. Oops. So it is important to engage all parties in an impartial environment. Do have written documentation of that so you clearly have all the facts. And that also helps in case there is an appeal to the process, that you know what was gathered and how it was gathered. And so BCEDA has established a committee on professional conduct, and they are responsible for receiving, reviewing, investigating, and determining the sanctions if necessary for an ethical violation. So here are the sanctions. First of all, it could be a private censure. That's where the violator is informed in writing with a warning that if any more of this occur as a repeated offense, it could cause more serious sanctions. And it could include as well notification to IEDC and EDAC in a way that then that is making others aware of this violation. Now, of course, a public censure is way more serious than that. Both the violator and their employer are informed of the violation and the nature of the sanction, and that future violations may result in more serious sanctions. So this is upping the ante on the violation, if you will. And certainly, instead of just may be notified at IEDC and EDAC, they certainly would be notified outside of BCEDA. There's also a suspension of membership. It could be temporary, and the employer would continue, but that specific person would be barred from events set by the, and the duration and the condition would be set by those policies. So if you're fully terminated as a member or canceled your certification or removed from the board or all of the above, the employer could remain a member, but not the actual person, and certainly would be barred from any future events. And if you are certified, this is like really bad. If you are certified by IEDC or EDAC, that would also be canceled. Oops. So we're here at the end. We're open to more questions, but I did want to make available to you that we do have a brand new hot off the press BCEDA ethics manual. That also includes the BCEDA code of conduct and all of the sanctions and procedures that we've covered here. So you have a great resource manual where you can use it as a tool for raising awareness and creating this at your organization. Our dream with all this is that every organization across BCEDA has their own code of conduct with policies and procedures for investigation and review. Now, I talked about case studies as a beautiful way to educate and and these are true case studies for economic development. Some of them were created at IEDC based on some things that have occurred, and others with BCEDA. But in reality, it doesn't really matter where they were created. They're great economic development situations that you all want to pay attention to and use as an educational source. So these are great materials, and we'll entertain any questions. I think that I wish you the greatest help here in learning from each other and raising this topic for your community and your organization. It will really elevate your professionalism across your organization and your community.
Great, thanks very much, Allison. Yes, it is an important topic. It's a topic that I know that when we took it to the board about establishing this, the board was for sure on board. And of course, this was a number of years ago, as Allison's highlighted. And we have had situations where we've had to bring in the enforcement program. We have worked with the legal team to develop this. And we want to make sure it's right for our members. And we do believe it adds a level of respect to the industry. And we all know how hard economic developers work. And so we wanted to make sure that there's something in their standards, similar to what IEDC had done. It has been picked up by other provinces and other areas to develop their own programs, and we're always happy to share our information. So
I will add one thing, Dale. If any of your organizations are doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work as a policy oriented, let alone education, this is a great way you could bring it also to the table, because they're on consistent paths. This may go deeper in some technical ways, but on the other hand, they both have consistent missions in creating an ethics code of conduct and the policies and procedures. So that maybe you're in your organization, if that's a promoted topic, that'd be like, and could we also look at our ethics in the same way, because we want to be above board in so many different ways.
Yeah.
Just another tag on there.
Good input. Anybody else have any questions, comments they'd like to make? If not, then I think we can end today. Again, I encourage you to go to your to the website, where we have a number of the manuals already online. And as well, Ashley has added the links to where on our website you can actually download the actual code of ethics and the enforcement manual for your own reference. And we'll see you all tomorrow for another webinar at 11 o'clock on neighborhood development. And we look forward to having you participate. And thanks very much, everyone, and have a great day.